breaking news is it when you put a madman in charge of America and you already have a madman in charge of North Korea, you're pretty much going to get what we have today, which is Donald Trump unnecessarily escalating the already escalating tensions with North Korea, and North Korea, Kim Jong Un responding in kind by saying that they're planning an attack on Guam. So this is what you get when you have two madmen. Seriously, um, there is a situation that has to be discussed with regard to North Korea, in terms of how to actually solve it, if it's solvable, or if there's anything to solve. Right? Those are like generally the three categories that breaks down into. But first, before we get to the underlying analysis of what has to be done, or our choices, at least our choices, we got to talk about the fact that we are primarily here right now because we have two madmen, one with one nuke and the other one with 20,000. And if it becomes a game of, the only thing that's worse than an arms race already has the and not just an arms race, but an escalation of escalation to arms, to armed conflict. It's already a vicious cycle in and of itself, in that it almost unnecessarily takes us into a conflict. That's what the theory of that's what the theory of an arms race dictates. That it pretty much leads us up to an armed conflict, almost inevitably. So, as bad as that vicious cycle is, on the flip side, you have this one getting spoiled egos thrown onto it. It's almost like an accelerant. It's almost like, we have an already volatile situation that political science models dictate is going to inevitably lead to a conflict. And I use that. Let me actually, that's not 100% precise. They don't dictate that it's going to lead to a conflict, but it allows the possibility that a conflict can emerge when you have two nations in basically in an arms race. This is like North Korea is now using the United States hostilities to justify their need to escalate their nuclear weapons. That's the vicious cycle, but that's a vicious cycle that we're already locked in. But the accelerant has been thrown on it because of Donald Trump. We're not in a good position. But now things are significantly worse because he wants to describe what he's going to do North Korea as rain down fire from heaven, the likes of which the world has never seen. I'm like, this dude is really auditioning for a remake of Exodus, the book of Exodus, for rain down fire. And pause and think, he can only be talking about nuclear weapons. 2, has he heard of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I mean, he's really, the president of the United States is trying to one up Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Little boy, big boy, what are we going to do? Fat boy? Is that what we're looking for, Donald Trump? And it's dangerous. I saw one guy tweet, someone I follow. He said it's scary hearing the president of the United States used to talk like this, but then it's he said the possibility that Donald Trump is saying this, not knowing what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's possible that he's saying this and not know it, but it's even more terrifying that he could actually know Hiroshima and Nagasaki and still be saying this. And again, the underlying dilemma is that of an arms race. Even though it's a single side arms race, we can lay this model out as if it was two nations in an arms race. right? As if both nations are increasing their weapons and their weaponry and their accumulation of weapons in order because they don't know. They don't know for sure what is happening behind the walls of that other nation. The United States doesn't know for sure what's happening there in North Korea, but we have to wag the dog. We have to bark our dogs and make it seem like if you're doing what we don't want you to do, then we're going to hit you. And as soon as we make that threat, North Korea is inevitably going to say, well, if you're going to hit me, then I need to make sure I have a bat to hit you back. And as soon as the United States see North Korea gets the bat, then we talk even harder and louder and saying, if you don't do it, then now we're going to rain down fire and glory from heaven. I couldn't believe what I heard that dude say this today. I mean, like we have a cartoon character for president. This dude could be like freaking, I don't know, one of these Disney villains with a long twisted beard. I mean, he's literally speaking. I guess it's inevitable, right? What's that? I guess there's a theory that says in the universe, if the universe is truly infinite, that you're going to end up getting a reputation, or not a reputation, but a repeat. You're going to start seeing perfect matches, like a complete copy, because if it's infinite, there's a complete copy of us out there. Donald Trump, Donald Trump literally is that complete copy. Right? He is a complete copy of this wild cartoon character villain, all mixed together as one. And he is literally taking this situation from bad to worse to almost point of no return because of how comical his character is. Like we ended up with the perfect combination of imbecility at the worst time imaginable. Imagine that. I mean, we're almost in a point where you have to imagine 13 days of JFK, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis instead of JFK. Imagine Donald Trump. There is no happy ending to that story. But that's where we are. And the only hope here is that I don't even know. I'm really trying to think where the hope lies in this scenario. Oh, this is dark. No wonder my mind is blocking it out. This is pretty bad. It almost seems like the worst case scenario as I think of it, but this is not the worst case scenario. If we do get into a conflict, our only hope is that they only have one nuclear weapon and that we can take them out and do whatever if they use it. And that would be that. One city hit and all those people lost. And then the entire North Korea. That's like, if Donald Trump keeps taking us down this path, that's going to be the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is China lays a red line and says, you know, with a person like Donald Trump in the White House. China draws a red line and says, if you hit North Korea, it's equivalent to hitting us. I mean, we have that doctrine here in the Western Hemisphere. If Russia, it still stands from 1962 with Khrushchev. If anyone hit JFK, if Russia hit anything in the Western Hemisphere, we consider it an attack on the United States. So the precedent is set. What if North Korea just turns around and says, hey, if you hit anything, not North Korea, but China, China turns around and says, hey, if you hit anything in this hemisphere, I don't think they can get away with the whole hemisphere, but they can certainly get away with saying if you hit North Korea, it's like hitting us. That's the worst case scenario with a person like Donald Trump in the driver's seat. And so we were already in a situation. Here's where Here's where the arms race theory, it's just the basic theory underneath international relations. It's the basic theory that leads up to realism. And it's based out of the history of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, and basically talking about Athens. I believe it was Athens and Sparta, either Athens. Anyway, two Greek nations were escalating hostilities in an arm race that took on a life of inevitability, and because the one nation did not know what the other nation was doing, but they knew that nation. The only thing they knew about that other nation was that they were arming themselves. And because they knew that about the other nation, they don't understand the intentions of that other nation. I have no idea what that nation is going to do with this weapon they're getting, but we have to prepare ourselves. And so they started preparing themselves. And then both nations see the other nation escalating in arms. Well, of course, they're going to go to the next level of the arms race, as far as their technology will allow them to go. But then, of course, their hostilities are going to increase because I see you gaining more weapons. So I'm going to gain more weapons. But then you gain more weapons. And so I gain more weapons. And you set this process of an inevitable war into motion. That is the underlying theory that's happening right now before our eyes. And even though it's one side, because the United States is already here with regard to our weaponry, we're at the pinnacle. Hopefully, for the love of holy God, we're talking about the United States arsenal includes hydrogen bombs. I believe they still include hydrogen bombs. I don't know if that was someone with a good tap on where we are in our nuclear deproliferation, I guess you can call disarming. But if we still have hydrogen bombs in our arsenal, you're talking about the peak of weaponry attainment, where we have to trigger an atom bomb in order to trigger. We have to set off an atomic bomb in order to trigger the hydrogen bomb. I'm sorry, I kind of laugh when things are like, you think about the absurdity of that. That's where we are. So on the United States side of the ledger, we're at the pinnacle of our weaponry, and this is where North Korea is trying to get in within range. And so it's a one-sided arms race in which one side has all the weapons, all the guns, all the bombs, and the other side is trying to catch up. So it's a little different than the arms race theory, but I think it shows you exactly what's going on and why what Donald Trump did today makes it that much more volatile. What he did today makes it that much more volatile. But holy shit, did you see what Kim Jong-un said as soon as business was over today? When he said they're preparing to attack Guam. Like, okay, I spent the last few minutes saying how dumb Donald Trump has made this. Yes, and this is the result. This is nothing but Kim Jong-un responding to Donald Trump's hubris, trying to show his hubris. So you have two little men trying to dick measure. Holy shit. He's talking about we're going to bomb Guam. He's targeting Guam. And I'm like, dude, the problem is there are going to be voices in the crowd who say, don't do anything to North Korea, solidarity with North Korea, hands off North Korea. And they say it as a general, and I'm semi-mocking it, but I'm not mocking it because I want to talk about the underlying argument there. But they outline a simplistic policy of just let North Korea get a nuclear weapon. Now, most people won't say that, but what they will say is every goddamn thing else. They will say, this is an American imperialism taking us to the point of war yet again. They will say, this is America's the number one rogue state. Ajuma Baraka from the VP pick for the Green Party for vice president. He's going to say that you are America's the rogue nation, not North Korea. Okay, that's fine. You're going to have people say that we have no right to tell North Korea what to do. Okay, you're right. But no one really is going to say the natural conclusion of those position points. The natural, you know why? Because it's the absurdity that you have to make them defend, and as a debate tactic, right? They don't want to say the absurdity, but you have to call them out on the logical conclusion of the absurdity, right? And this is not saying that what what they're saying is absurd, but the natural conclusion that they're leaving out is absurd. And that natural conclusion to their logic is, if we don't have the right to tell North Korea what to say, which we don't. If we don't have, if America is the real rogue nation, so we shouldn't, to quote K, right? It's a logical fallacy there, but we'll let them get away with it. If we should say, oh, America is the real rogue nation, and so because America is the real rogue nation, we shouldn't say anything about North Korea, which is 100% implied in these arguments. Okay, I can't say that you're right because it's a logical fallacy, but what I can say is, if that's what you want to argue, okay. The logical conclusion of all of these arguments, they don't want to say it, is that North Korea will get a nuclear weapon. Plain and simple. So that's really where this goes. And once you say that, it's irresponsible for you to say that and not discuss the real implications of what that means. People leave it there and just say, oh, well, let them get a nuclear weapon. We don't have the moral right to tell them anything. Oh, okay, fine, cool. But what you have done now is you've introduced an element into the global order which has a modicum of peace, right? We have a modicum of stability. But what you've done is inserted a highly volatile, destabilizing force into the international order. And I feel that if you're going to make that argument, then you have the moral responsibility to discuss what your suggestion implies, or it's going to necessitate, or what happens. You cannot sit back and say, okay, so we don't have the right to tell North Korea not to get a nuclear weapon. Fine, we don't have that right. Now what? They get a nuclear weapon. Now what? That's the end of everything. No. Everything was better. No. Nobody's going to be held accountable to the fact that introducing a volatile situation like North Korea obtaining a nuclear weapon into consider what if we had set back and allowed Iran to get a nuclear weapon while they are a rogue state that's not assimilated into the international order. What would it say? What would have happened, right? If we had an Iran that was a rogue state. Right now, that would be the most destabilizing thing. And people are going to say, yeah, but you should just let them. And, anyone in the region who feels threatened enough to go to war is going to be the wrong one. And somehow or another, it'll be connected to American imperialism. Somehow. But anyway, I digress. But the point is that once you put that destabilizing force into the equation, it disrupts the equation. And I have too many progressives who say, oh, we don't have the moral authority to tell them what to do. And they never address what the natural conclusion of that logical argument, or illogical many times, of that argument, what happens? Let me see if I can say it any simpler. It's like saying, well, okay, let's use this. It's like saying, I'm going to set off a nuclear weapon, and then you decide not to discuss everything that happens after setting off that nuclear weapon. That's almost quite literally. Not quite literally, because there's the other argument. There's the other argument. North Korea doesn't have any reason to attack. They don't have any reason to attack. And so they're getting this nuclear weapon simply as a deterrent against the United States. Because somehow we believe it more likely that the United States, anyway, I'm going to leave that one alone. We believe that the United States would use it in we believe that the United States would do the most devastating thing to international order. I'm sorry, folks. This is not, you're like, holy shit, this changed. This is not the most progressive argument, Ben. Notice I haven't advocated, going to war with North Korea is the worst thing that we could do, and we should not do it. And I'm going to say that. But holy shit, if we don't examine the implications of everything that what I just said, this is why I struggle with it, right? I struggle with it because I have a responsibility as a thinker to say, okay, no, we shouldn't, hands off North Korea. I need to deal with the ramifications of the argument I just made. I need to talk about the implications of everything that I just said, because it doesn't just end there. And it's disingenuous and detrimental to intellectual thought for us to throw out a suggestion, a recommendation, or an argument, and when the real life implications of that argument include the most destabilizing component that we've seen since the last nation that got a nuclear weapon that we didn't approve of. Pakistan. I mean, holy shit, that's the perfect example, right? You have not Iran, you have India and Pakistan, two neighbors, bitter enemies. And they both, can you imagine what would have happened if Pakistan got the bomb and India didn't get the bomb? Could be nothing, right? Could be nothing. But you sure as hell better believe that thinkers who are and advisors to our leaders who, I mean, holy shit, I'm talking about Donald Trump. So it's like making my head hurt that Donald Trump is in this position. But you better damn well believe that a person who's advising the president of the United States, let's just pretend like we have JFK there for a minute, because just think, I mean, seriously, that shit depresses me when I think about Donald Trump in this situation and him having to deal with a complicated thought. And so what realistically is going to happen is you're going to have advisors around him who have the 2-sentence solution to keep it simple. Let's strike. That is a nauseating feeling. That's nauseating because they're saying let's strike without any thought, any real thought into what happens after that. And so they are doing the same exact thing that I'm behooving us not to do on the progressive side, which is to simply say, let's not do anything and not answer the question of what happens when North Korea does get the bomb. Now, if your argument is nothing's going to happen, oh, okay. I just need you to give me a really good explanation as to why you think nothing would happen when history has taught us the theory of the arms race, not really a theory, but concept, the arms race concept. Everything has taught us when you have a regional power gaining weaponry and escalating in their arms race, then their neighbor is going to do the same thing. And right now, you know what they're depending on? They're 100% depending on the fact that America has promised to protect them. Japan and South Korea. 100% relying on that. And thank God they're relying on that, because if not, they would be getting their own nuclear weapons as well. I mean, hold on. I mean, Japan, I think Japan's already armed. My brain is not calculating that properly, but I'm sure somebody in the chat room has already yelled whether that is accurate or inaccurate. But the point is, it's a highly volatile accelerant that's being thrown into a already volatile situation. And everything about this, from Donald Trump being the idiot that he is, unnecessarily saying this. Did you see him? He was flanked by his wife, and they were at some golfing thing. Like, you know, you are essentially saying the most dangerous thing in the world from the most ridiculous place in the world. This is like, take the Disney character, the villain. This is like him, you know, making his most evil speech, and he's doing it from, you know, from the toilet. That's how ridiculous this is how ridiculous Donald Trump sounds, and the absurdity of what he's saying. So it's destabilizing on all ends. Where do we go from here? The only way we really go from here and not blow everybody to smithereens is that there's somebody smart advising both of them that there is a possibility of escape. Despite everything that I just said for the last 20 minutes, there is a possibility for escape, and that's for both sides to communicate. That's it. The only way we got out of the Cuban Missile Crisis was that there was smart enough people on both sides to say there's a third way for us to get out of this. Without there being the possibility of diplomacy, we would not have had the ability to get out of the most recent missile crisis that we had, or the arms race that we had with Iran. And our diplomacy, look what our diplomacy is flanked by. Our diplomacy says, okay, we're going to release our funds and our sanctions, which yes, they just undermined it, but let's see how Iran actually responds to that. So let's just put that off the table for right now, because they haven't totally abandoned the nuclear deal, despite the sanctions that Democrats and Republicans signed off on in order to get Russia. They also got Iran and North Korea to boot. But putting that aside, we have created a framework in our Iran that will allow them, we have a moment of diplomacy that stop hostilities, and we gave them time, 10 to 15 years, for them to assimilate into the global order. So in exchange for them eventually getting a nuclear weapon, I mean, this is essentially what we're doing. We are agreeing to let Iran get a nuclear weapon in the long run, but we're giving them everything and every incentive they can to be assimilated into the world order, because if they're not assimilated into the world order, they are a rogue nation and they play a destabilizing effect, not because they have to, but because things get out of freaking control. This is the entire thing with, I mean, I can use a most recent example. I can use an example of how, anyway, it's kind of an absurd example. But when the momentum of the escalation of hostilities is hitting, holy shite, it boils over like a chemical reaction, and it just escalates out of control with so much quickness. And think about what's happening right now. As we speak, Donald Trump could have escalated because of Kim Jong-un escalating it. It's a rapid fire escalation that, unless there is a moment of somebody telling one of these two idiots that we have to take a third way, this naturally ends in disaster. And this is, there's one thing that I left off that I was getting ready to talk about in there, but maybe I'll come back to it. Again, I want to emphasize, it's not because it is inevitable. It's because the momentum of how these things escalate almost makes it inevitable. And the only way out of this, quite simply, quite literally, is the hope that we can have both sides take a moment to realize that there's an opportunity away from this without us blowing each other up. Well, it's not really going to play out like that. It's without us blowing North Korea up and North Korea blowing up either Tokyo or Seoul. But that's what happened with, and I honestly think that the Iranian deal, Donald Trump can say whatever the hell he wants to about it. I almost think it's a beautiful piece of art because of what is required to make it happen, which is the assimilation into the global order. And we'll talk about that, right? Because people, like, if they hear that phrase, the assimilation into the global order, they go, oh my God, Ben is a globalist. No, Ben is a stabilityist. I want stability. That's, if you want to know what my number one issue is, my number one desire is stability, because we are in a volatile stage of human evolution, right? War-making evolution. We are at a volatile stage of human war-making evolution where we are making abilities that we can't simply just say, let's change the world order. I absolutely, and I wasn't really feeling good when I did the start of the show today. Still don't feel good, but holy God, do you realize how irresponsible it is for our side to say all we have to do is nationalize the banks? All we have to do is change the world order. Do you realize the natural conclusion of what you just said out of your mouth? The natural conclusion is nuclear war. Because that's where we are in the development of human war-making capabilities. You cannot just say we're going to change the global order to be something else because we don't like what it is right now. Because right now it's a capitalistic and well any other variation. It's a capitalistic imperialistic order. I was about to give you a caveat, but F the caveat. We have a capitalistic imperialistic order on the global stage, and at best, you can try to make the case that America is a benevolent dictator, imperialist. And as ugly as that reality is, what it takes to change that reality is even uglier. Okay, let's put it like this. If somebody can give me a cogent argument that takes us from an imperialistic, capitalistic world order to any other version, whatever you want, whatever your ideal order is. If you can give me a map that does not involve nuclear weapons, I'm all for it. I will advocate for it. As a matter of fact, I will become your new prophet in the wilderness, crying out in the wilderness, repent because this is the way we need to go. Somebody draw me a roadmap that takes us from the capitalistic imperialistic system that we have and carries us to a new world order without a nuclear holocaust. Because I don't see it. Because this is why Francis Fukuyama wrote the book, The End of History, The Last Man and the End of History. His premise was that we are at I don't want to misattribute some of his argument, but the basic premise was we are at a stage in human evolution that this is it. This is the best that mankind can do. And it was a depressing book. I think he wrote it kind of as a celebratory book of this, imperialistic, capitalistic world order, right? I think maybe Fukuyama actually thought it was a great thing. And I looked at it as shit. This is the best we can do. I'm like, is this the best mankind can actually do? But when you think about where we're frozen, we're like frozen in a moment of human societal evolution in terms of what we can do and how creative we can be. And once you look at our options of getting there, it becomes painfully obvious that transitioning to something other than this order, and this is not to say the order is good. This is not to say the order is good whatsoever. I mean, hell, look at I just advocated last night for a more egalitarian society, basically a socialist order. So it's not as though I think this system is good. It's just that I'm required. My way of thinking requires me to consider the implications of transitioning from what we currently have to something else. And I feel like, and maybe it's not their job, right? Everybody has a job. My job is to think this shit through. Other people's job might just be to say that's the right way. And my job is to say, okay, we got to think this through. And that fits perfectly into what I'm talking about with North Korea and on a macro and on a micro level. We're talking about in regards to North Korea and Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un right now is because we have to have somebody in both of their cabinets who's going to think this decision through beyond just the talking point of let's do it. Beyond just the talking part of let's strike. There's got to be somebody there thinking this thing through. And then I pause and realize Donald Trump is the president of the United States. And that makes my stomach turn, not from being sick, but from actually being afraid.